And welcome in. It's another edition of Fifth Avenue Faceoff. Be sure to follow the podcast inside your Odyssey app, AUDACY. That's when you'll get the newest episodes delivered right to you, right there in your Odyssey app, where you can listen worldwide, wherever you are and whatever you may be up to. Wherever you get your podcasts, be sure to subscribe. Leave a rating and review. We appreciate it, as always. I'm Chris Mack of 93.7 The Fan and The Fan Morning Show in Pittsburgh. Jackie Redmond of NHL Network later, Bob Pompeani of KDKA TV. But as we like to do a couple times a week, we bring our man Tango to the table, former Penguin Eric Tangradi. Follow him on Twitter at @eTangradi. Tango, how we doing? And what do we make of this team, man? I don't know. It's up and down. It's back and forth. Thought we had a pretty good weekend against a couple of Metro Division opponents, looking pretty good in a win against the Rangers. And yet here we go, another blown lead against the team they're not as that isn't as good as them. Chris Letang saying they let their foot off the gas, didn't have the same urgency as Montreal. Jason Zucker, who's been arguably the best player on this team, not named Sidney Crosby over the last month and a half, saying they don't have any answers for this thing. So what's your answer? What do we do? I feel like we've beat around it constantly for the last month and a half. How do we get this team to put forth a full 60-minute effort?
Yeah. First off, thanks for having me. Got some heavy hitters on the show today. I guess I'm a good little warm up before we get Pomp and
you're
Jackie.
On my leadoff, man. You got to set the stage. You got to get us moving in the right direction.
No, it's fair. It's great, but no. Yeah. It seems again like it's a couple feet, 1 foot forward, 2 steps back type of thing. I mean, they had a great week. Obviously, to me, the Islanders game was a real gut-wrenching loss in the sense of like total control of the hockey game until they didn't. Big overtime win against the Rangers, and then that game yesterday. I'm wondering if they're still in this mode where like they just assume that they're in the playoffs. They have so much pedigree, so many guys have been there. There really hasn't ever been that fear of like, oh man, like we might miss the playoffs because they've always just made it. So I'm curious to see, like, I just don't see that enough consistent desperation hockey. Like, of course, I'm sure that game against New York, against the Rangers in New York, they'll probably play their best game of the year because they just took one on the chin at home. But it's like you're running out of days in the season. You're running out of time. Obviously, the Islanders gave them a break last night by losing as well. Maybe did I read that right? They did lose. Yeah. So like you need to be as a team pushing for the playoffs. Like you need to create your own destiny. You don't want to look at it like, oh, we lost, but the Islanders lost. Like no, they need to be playing desperate hockey every shift, every period. Stuff we've talked about over and over again. I don't have the answers because it just seems like one night it's incredible, all 4 lines, and then last night was special teams were a wreck, bottom 6. A little bit of a liability, not enough consistency.
Yeah, and it's to the point where that games in hand that we've been talking about for a while is starting to be frittered away too, right? Like they've only got 2 games in hand now against the Islanders. Those games, as we've said over and over, don't really matter unless you win them. They don't have any games in hand against, for example, the team they're chasing in the Rangers. They're 8 points back of them now, or a team that's chasing them in the Panthers, for example, who are 9th in the conference and only 5 points behind them. So, well, you're right. We don't have the answers to how they need to create the urgency. But the one thing I do get a sense of, and it's one thing coaches do all the time, right, in the middle of a game to create some urgency, is yank the goaltender. Had to do it for a 3rd time in Tristan Jarry's half dozen games back against Montreal. So my question to you is, does it make sense going into New York on Thursday to roll with DeSmith instead of Tristan Jarry, or is that something that you can't get to yet?
No, I think you have to. I think it's the season's on the line. I mean, the days are dwindling. Like every game is the most important game of the season. I understand that the process of like we have to get Jarry acclimated after his injury, see if we can get the best out of him in a short time, so we can have that 1-2 punch, especially with the schedule coming up. But you have to ride who has been the most consistent, which is not necessarily consistent, but of the two. I think you have to ride DeSmith, and obviously a lot of that's going to depend on the outcome. I would assume he gets to start on Thursday, and then see how that goes going into Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, I would even consider playing them both. To your point, if he plays well Thursday night and you get a win against the Rangers and you're going to be right back there at the Garden on Saturday, why not roll with the same guy? I mean, this is something they failed to really address in the offseason. They brought back DeSmith to back up Jari. They know what they have in Jari, or I guess they don't know what they have in Jari. That's the bigger problem here. So you're kind of stuck with what you got. The hand that you've been dealt is the one you have, so you better play it. So I would lean Jari as well on Thursday, DeSmith on Thursday, even if that means that Jari has to sit. I obviously knocking the rust off, like we've talked about with Jari, has not worked. So you go with the hot hand at this point. Like you said, at this point in the season, you're running out of days, just 15 games left. To that point, too, I think we thought maybe they overplayed their hand a little bit when they went out and got all these defensemen. But here they are now, possibly down 3 of them going into Thursday's game. Kulikov week to week. Jan Ruda took a pretty nasty shot on the inside of the knee. We don't know what's up with him. Petrie, we're not sure of any length of time either. So how do you build this blue line now when it looks like you may be down to just 2 righties in Letang and Ruhwedel? Everyone else is a lefty, including maybe Ty Smith, if you call him up, and POJ, who continues to play somewhat erratically.
Right. It's almost like just the cards you're dealt this time of year. It's unfortunate you make trades. That stuff is a little unlucky. Hardest part for me watching last night's game was like, how good did Matheson look? Not to go back and try to play armchair GM again, but there's another guy that, we see the McCann and then we see Matheson. It's like, man, like that would have been a young guy. Yeah. If only we just, kept what we had a little bit moving forward. But that's all kind of water over the bridge at this point. But yeah, I think you just need somebody to step up. I mean, look, you're going to get massive minutes out of that top 3, top 4, and somebody just has to step in and be willing to just eat pucks, block shots, and keep things simple. But that's what happens this time of year. And it kind of goes back to, as an organization, obviously not having first-round picks, not having top 15 picks, like they just don't have a very strong system right now. There's nobody really in the minors that is like pushing this lineup and getting, I think, a fan base excited for the future. And that is a little bit scary when you look at just trying to get in the back door to the playoffs this year.
Yeah, to that point, though, I think it's been something to see that when Mike Sullivan has leaned into some of the younger guys. It took him 3 months to finally really commit to putting Drew O'Connor in the lineup every night. It's worked. Now that they've got Nylander up here, it's worked. He's been one of their better players in the middle 6, at least. They're going to have to probably dip down into Wilkes for at least 1, if not 2 guys over the next week or 2 because of these injuries on defense. Is it on Sully to finally put a foot down and just refuse to play Jeff Carter? Or is it a stubborn coach with a veteran player that he's trying to give absolutely every last chance to?
Yeah, I think when it comes to, and this is just from my own experience, if a veteran in the coach's eyes is a tie to a younger player that hasn't proven himself, that hasn't played consistent hockey in big moments, the veteran's always going to get the opportunity. I know that Carter's had his struggles, but face-off circle, he's strong. Generally, defensively with his skating, that's where his strengths are. Now, contributing offensively, that part of his game is kind of faltered a little bit. But I almost see it as late in the season, they're treating this like playoffs. You got to give the veteran the opportunity to play bigger minutes in a bigger role. But I can understand both sides of the argument of like you have somebody young, fresh blood who is just out there every shift, like laying it all on the line because every day could be their last. But I know that coaches, especially veteran coaches, get a little bit hesitant to put a lot more trust in those guys in these types of games.
Yeah, it's tough to see. Jeff Carter's a really solid dude and has been great for a long time. It's tough to see him out there struggling with the minutes that he's been given and being put out there on the ice in important situations and still not coming through. A -4 last night, which is when you're losing to Montreal and struggling against Columbus and the teams of that ilk, it's tough, especially when you see young guys come in and have a positive impact on the lineup. So before I let you run, it's free agency season in the NFL, right? And you're a football fan. You grew up out on the other side of PA as an Eagles fan. So your favorite team, and you're a Steelers fan now, I know. Your favorite teams are dealing with free agency. Everybody's favorite team is. But do you have any, as we go for 2 with Tango, any crazy free agency stories from the NFL? Like, July 1st in the NHL is the day, right? Where, I don't know, maybe you're talking to a buddy and he says, my gosh, you wouldn't believe what my agent's telling me. Or, oh, I'm out on the golf course and all of a sudden I got a call from this guy. Would you believe this team wants me? Or, what's it like when you get an opportunity to go overseas and you don't know anything about a team, but they're offering you money to go keep playing the game? For just a couple of minutes, any crazy stories that surround free agency in Eric Tangradi's world?
Yeah, so I'll probably not give the name, but I went to my brother-in-law had his bachelor party in Las Vegas. A couple NHL buddies of mine who are mutual friends with my brother-in-law. We're on a bachelor party. We're in Las Vegas, and we're at a nightclub. And this buddy of mine who plays in the NHL is coming off his entry-level contract, and he got a text message that he just got a 5-year deal for just right around $30 million on the dance floor at the nightclub.
No.
So at that point, we're going absolutely crazy, and he
bottle service for everybody.
Yes, yep. He said, "Oh my gosh, this is incredible! If the deal's done, let's have ourselves a time." He goes to pay for all these bottles. His credit card gets declined because at that point he was on an entry level, wasn't really making like the big money yet, even though he was signing the papers. So the credit card gets declined, and of course. I had to scoop the tab up. Paid me back for everything, no, but It was just a really cool experience where we're just on a bachelor party, and most people on a bachelor party are just a bunch of broke guys doing the best they can to have a good time.
Right.
Signs were right around $30 million. I got the bill, everyone. Card declined.
Oh, that's classic.
So,
and then really, you're taking out loans from your buddies for the rest of the weekend, even though you got a fat contract coming. That's amazing. All right. I know you got stuff going on, so I'm going to let you bounce. We'll catch up later in the week, hopefully, and see if this team starts to point themselves in the right direction just a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that game against Montreal, you can look at it today like it's not the end of the world because the Islanders lost, but take a look at their schedule next week, back-to-back Colorado, Dallas. Like those will be 2 points as a fan base that you'll be sitting there saying, oh, man, why did we let those slide when we're going into Colorado, fly through the night, and then go play against Dallas back-to-back? It's going to be a scary week. Obviously, can't overlook the Rangers, back-to-back games there, statement games in MSG. But, this schedule does not look very nice for the next 10 days. 6 games in 10 days.
Yeah, all of a sudden, even a game against Ottawa looks important with the way they've been playing the last couple of weeks. It's nuts. Everything takes on magnified meaning with 15 games left. Tango, appreciate the time today, man. We'll catch up again soon.
Thanks, Chris. Talk soon.
8 points behind the Rangers, just 5 points ahead of the Panthers. As you heard me mention to Eric earlier, it's tough because those games in hand are evaporating, and yet here the Penguins remain right there in the thick of the wild card race. 2 games in hand still against the Islanders, I guess, for what that counts, but you're only 2 points ahead of them. I don't know how much damage you're going to do with those games in hand. If you're watching on YouTube, you're seeing the air quotes with my fingers, and of course, that's where you can get the show, as well as inside your Odyssey app. Odyssey colleague, Boomer Esiason, wanted to have him on the show this week, right? I mentioned this story last week that I kept teasing it, but I'll tell you the story now. I reached out to a mutual friend of mine and Boomer's and asked if he could pass the message along. This is probably about a month and a half ago. Pass the message along to Boomer. Hey, I'd love to have him on the show during Pens Rangers week, right? Because we've all been looking at these 3 games between the Pens and the Rangers and what it would mean for the standings and the Metro Division race and playoff positioning. He said, yeah, sure, no problem. I'll pass it along to him. And I'm sitting there watching a Pens Islanders game one night. And I remember the specific moment because it made me so out of my mind, mad. But there was this scrum around the net. It was the night Matt Martin of the Islanders happened to just be taking runs at everybody in black and gold, right? I mean, absolutely everybody. And it ended up being another Islanders game where the Pens blew a lead and lost to New York when they should have won. And I just remember grabbing my phone and I just tap out on my phone. Oh, what a surprise. Matt Martin playing like an asshole. And I said, it's YouTube and it's online, so I can swear now. I'm not used to being able to say those words and not get yelled at. I typed that out on my Twitter and I bang, hit send. And you say, oh, wow, you shouldn't swear like that on Twitter. Well, it's Twitter and I'm mad. Okay. And I don't like the way Matt Martin is playing. Okay. The way Matt Martin was playing that night was typical of the way Matt Martin and the Islanders have played against the Penguins for years. Just a lack of respect, especially toward the superstars. So I tapped that out. Oh, what a surprise. Matt Martin playing like an a-hole. And a couple days later, not even thinking of any of the connections here, I circle back around to the mutual friend in New York between Boomer Esiason and I. Boomer, a huge Rangers fan, but I reach back out to our mutual friend and I say, hey, did you get a chance to ask Boomer about coming on Fifth Avenue Faceoff? And he says, yeah, I think calling his son-in-law an asshole probably took care of that. And it hit me. Oh, yeah. Matt Martin from the Islanders is married to Boomer's daughter. Oops. But here's the deal. That's how Matt Martin makes his money, Boom. What are we doing? How are you getting annoyed at that? I mean, the timing on my part, admittedly, a little less than perfect. That maybe a day or two after I had reached out to Boomer to try and get him on the show, I tap out a tweet calling his son-in-law an asshole. Actually, I didn't call him that. I didn't call him an a-hole. I said he was playing like an a-hole, which is an important distinction I was taught by an old boss a long time ago. Anyway, point remains. Boomer, would still love to have you on the show if this message somehow gets to you. You're probably not interested, and that's fine. But I did not call your son-in-law, Matt Martin, an asshole. I technically said he played like one, which is it's in his job description. That's the way he plays the game. He's proud of it. The Islanders and their fans are proud of it. You should be proud of it too. I imagine your daughter may be proud of her husband for the way he plays the game because his teammates rally around it. So keep that in mind. If you'd ever like to see fit to forgiving me for saying your son-in-law plays hockey like an expletive deleted, that's what he's supposed to do. Oh, well. We will have, later in the week, Sean Marash from the DA show on CBS Sports Radio, another noted New York Rangers fan, and we have a bet with each other as we do a BetQL show together. A bet that I am currently winning with 2 games left in this season series between the Pens and the Rangers. But we'll talk to Mraz, as he's known, Sean Marash of CBS Sports Radio, later in the week about that bet and this Pens-Rangers series, which, let's be honest, if you're looking for a reason the Penguins may have struggled against Montreal, at least mentally staying engaged in the game, especially after going up 2-0, I'm not excusing it. I'm not saying it's good, but if you're looking for an excuse, it may be, oh, we've got this Canadiens game and those guys suck in between 3 games against the Rangers that may help decide where we end up finishing in the Metro Division standings and who we end up facing in the first round of the playoffs. Just something to consider. All right, Jackie Redmond of NHL Network going to join us in just a couple of minutes. It's Women's History Month, so I'm curious, who was the woman that inspired young Jackie Redmond growing up in Canada or motivated her to chase down a career in sports broadcasting? Plus, we talked to her, obviously, about her thoughts on the Pens and where they're at right now. And she's friends with a famous Pittsburgher that I have to ask her about. Speaking of famous Pittsburghers, Bob Pompeani, the man, the myth, the legend himself. You know Pompin' ain't easy. Bob Pompeani of KDKA TV Channel 2 and 93.7 The Fan. He joins me next right here on Fifth Avenue Faceoff. Welcome back in Fifth Avenue Faceoff. Subscribe inside your Odyssey app, AUDACY. That's where you get it delivered as soon as it's ready. A couple times a week, we go around the league usually and talk to people who have a view from the other side of the ice. We'll get a league-wide view from Jackie Redmond of NHL Network in just a couple of minutes. You heard my story about why Boomer Esiason won't be coming on the show this week, but we're doing better than Boomer. Who needs Boomer? We got Pomp. Pompin' ain't easy, but he's here with us anyway. Bob Pompeani of KDKA TV2. Pomp, thanks for doing it. How have you been, my friend?
I'm doing well, Chris. How are you doing? Congrats on the new podcast here.
Thank you. It's been a heck of a time to get it started with the ups and the downs of this team. And I don't know. I'll ask you. You've been watching this team for years. You've covered all 5 Stanley Cup runs. What is the deal with this team? And can they get right in these final 15 games after what we saw third time in 6-7 games? They blow a big lead. They have to pull their goaltender against Montreal on Tuesday night. Can they get things set in the right direction between now and, well, this time next month?
You know, I think the simple answer is goaltending. If you look back at all those teams that won, they had reliable, confident goaltending. And this team right now does not have that. This has, Casey DeSmith has emerged as maybe a better option. And I don't know if that's a good thing heading into the playoffs. They got to get Tristan Jarry right. We saw it again in that Montreal game where, 4 goals on 7 shots. That's it. And listen, I know that they have leaks in front of him, and I know their defensive coverage has been lacking at times. But, you got to make saves in those situations and bail your guy out, bail your team out. And I think we saw that with Montembaum with Montreal. He was facing a lot of shots, and he came up with big saves. The biggest one probably was third period on Zucker. Anyway, if you don't get that, I don't think you really have a chance. The problem with this team does not lie with the guys they brought back and expect to be here for the next 4 years or so. Those guys are all playing well. It's, the other problem is bottom 6, not much consistency. In fact, the Carter situation is really a difficult one. All these moves that Ron Hextall made at the deadline, he's trying to dig himself out from them. He did it with Kapanen. He did it with McGinn. Carter, he gave a 2-year extension to. These are moves that probably shouldn't have been made. And now you're kind of stuck here, which limited what they could do at the trade deadline, although I thought they should have done more. But, those are the 2 biggest problems that I see here that I didn't see back in those teams that were winning: goaltending and bottom 6 contributions from other than star players.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, what we've seen all year long, sort of, whether you put it on Sullivan at times, whether you put it on Hextall for the pieces that he's handing to Sullivan to work with, this stubbornness to really lean in on certain players. And, it took them 2.5, 3 months to get Drew O'Connor in the lineup on a regular basis. Alex Nylander's finally up here and playing on a regular basis and looking pretty good. It's paralyzing them as far as Jeff Carter goes. And perhaps I worry, I'm sure it's something you mentioned, DeSmith may be the guy to go to at this point, but it's something I worry about with goaltending as well. Do they continue to go back to Jarry? Casey DeSmith should be starting Thursday night in New York, but I fear that they'll go back to Jarry and use this excuse of, well, he's still knocking off the rust.
Yeah, I think it's more than knocking off the rust. I think even though Mike Sullivan said after that Montreal game that, he's healthy, it's just a matter of getting him up to it. I still think there's something there, and I don't know what it would be. Hip injury was mentioned. That's a bad injury if you're a goaltender trying to get through it, especially with the word chronic attached to it. So that's a concern, and I do believe they have to get him up to speed. At what cost, however? Do you sacrifice points against teams you need to beat to do it? No, I don't think so. You got 2 games against the Rangers coming up, and DeSmith right now is your best option, so I have to go with him. And I thought, they lost the opportunity maybe to catch the Rangers third with that loss to Montreal. They still got a lot of work to do it. But you have to worry now about guys coming from behind, the teams like the Florida Panthers, even though the Penguins have games in hand, teams like Ottawa, Buffalo even, depending on if they get hot. And if the Penguins, go back and forth with this inconsistent play, it opens up the door for those teams to come in. So I still think they're going to make the playoffs. I do think they'll have a tough assignment regardless of who they play. Although with Carolina, that's a tough loss with Svechnikov being gone for the rest of the season. That's a hard one for them. But, they still have a pretty good team that gives the Penguins fits. So bottom line is they just got to get in. If they get in, the goaltending better be good, or else we're going to see what we've seen for the last 3 years.
Yeah, and back to Jeff Carter for just a second as one of those guys that they haven't been able to get away from, whether it's Mike Sullivan being stubborn or they feel like they can't call anybody up because of the cap situation. Now you're kind of limited in the number of call-ups you can have unless you've got injuries, which unfortunately they're dealing with on the blue line. How would you remedy the Jeff Carter situation? My idea would just be, hey, use one of these blue line injuries, probably Ruda, to make an emergency call up. It might not necessarily be a defenseman I call up. I might bring up another forward, just somebody to get into the lineup on the bottom 6 because Paling's still out. Bonino's hurt now. Use an emergency call up. Get somebody, I don't know, one of those forwards from Wilkes-Barre up here, insert them into the lineup to maybe breathe some fresh air into this thing and finally send Jeff Carter to the press box.
I wouldn't disagree with that. And they brought Jonathan Gruden up a few weeks ago, but they only played him like 2 or 3 minutes. You can't do much in 2 or 3 minutes. At some point, you have to rely on. They won, as you know, those 2 Stanley Cups by getting a tremendous infusion of youth into their lineup. Guys who came up and immediately contributed, and that's what's kind of missing right now. I'm glad to see Nylander up here. They got to play him more. O'Connor, you need those young guys to give you a little boost when it comes to the energy of the game. And I think Gruden would be a call-up I'd make, and I'd play him. It can't get any worse. Carter was a -4 in that game against Montreal. He hasn't scored in a long time. he seems to be just a luxury item to win faceoffs, and that's it. You can't afford to have that, especially if the guy's not going to score. So I think, at this point, you got to make a decision. Mike Sullivan tends not to do that. It seems he, pivots toward the veterans. But at this point, what do you have to lose? Jeff Carter has been totally unproductive.
What's your benchmark, since we're talking about personnel moves, what's your benchmark this year for saying, okay, I'm all right with bringing Ron Hextall back? Or is that an impossibility for you at this point?
I think I've gotten to the point where I think it's time to make a change. I don't think he has much of a history as a GM. That's a successful history. Therefore, and he seems to be, caught in a quandary right now, trying to be a winner now and trying to protect assets for the future. Well, you got to choose here, one or the other. And if you're not going to make winning now a priority, then you probably shouldn't have brought in guys like Granlund or anyone else to put another $10 million on the books for the next 2 years. I don't think he wants to give in to sacrificing future assets. And if you don't do that right now, then what's the point? Why did you bring everybody back? You have a veteran lineup. It's the oldest lineup in the NHL. And, you should have made that number one pick or something else available to someone else at the trade market. I just don't like the way he's navigated through this. I think you need a fresher approach. Jim Rutherford had his warts, no doubt about it. I mean, he threw some things away, but he was quick to make deals that he thought would help them now. And it's still about now with the Penguins. And if it's about now, then now is the time to do something with him, I think, at the end of this season.
Yeah, if you're all about now, then you better be aggressive. And Hextall's been anything but with his moves. He sat and waited and waited and waited and been far too patient at times. Let me ask you this. This is off the beaten path here, but you've worked in local TV for 35 years now, right? 40 years. That's right. Your 40th anniversary was last year, Punk.
No.
Oh my God. But we're at an inflection point now where it sounds like somebody's going to have to take charge of this situation that fans I know are really worried about with how am I going to watch my games? It sounds like there's a possibility now that Nesson, being that they are, the Fenway Sports Group is majority owners of the Penguins. Of course, they own 80% of Nesson as well, New England Sports Network, which has the rights to Red Sox and Bruins games. It makes a lot of sense that we may see that become a primary method, that they may come in to sort of prop up at least broadcast for these local Pittsburgh teams. But I'm just curious what your perspective is on, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it, the industry now and people getting an opportunity to watch their teams. Because I think all the way back to when you first broke in, and I would watch Pirate games on KDKA sometimes, or, Fox 53 back in the day, right? It was a completely different landscape than it is now, because then you had the rise of the cable sports networks like KBL and eventually Fox Sports Pittsburgh. And I'm curious what your perspective is on it with someone who has so many years of experience, and where you think we're headed with it.
Well, we're heading in multiple directions very quickly. I see that Bally, filed for bankruptcy this week, and you knew that was going to happen. I don't think fans are ever going to be without watching games. Somebody's going to make it available, whether it's the Penguins and the Pirates combining on a network that can make it happen, that is fueled and run by Major League Baseball and the production team they have, because that could very well be in play. AT&T Sports has two networks, 1 and 2. I think you're right when you say NESN. I was talking to some people who work there who said it's very much alive, that conversation is being talked about because of the Fenway Group. Whatever it may be, it's going to be available. The question is, how will it cost? Is it going to cost people more? How much will they have to pay? And I think people are very much concerned about that. So I know that our station here, KDKA, and Pittsburgh CW, which is our sister station, I think we would be interested in doing some of those games over commercial television if we had an opportunity. So I don't know if that exists, if that's a possibility. I know our people are interested. And there are ways to do it that wouldn't put pressure on people who are watching in terms of streaming money, more of it. But I think ultimately what you're going to have, Chris, is exactly that. You're going to have opportunities to watch when national games happen. But in the meantime, there's going to be a new sort of streaming network that comes in, whether it's a combination of NHL and MLB, whatever the case. I think that's the future. I don't think you're going to have to worry about the rest of this season. I think they'll figure out a way to make it available. And then in the off season, that's when hockey specifically will change. And I'm not sure what direction it ends up.
Yeah, I'm seeing numbers thrown around at like $30 a month, $320 a year, which, when we first started having this conversation on the morning show about a month ago, I threw out $20 a month. I thought was reasonable and feasible. But, in a world where people are already linked into how many different streaming services, you're paying $10, $15 a month for each of those in some cases. It very quickly adds right back up to what you were paying for cable anyway. The fact that KDKA and Pittsburgh CW would be interested, local CBS Pittsburgh would be interested and be able to, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but clear that onto free TV for people would, I think, be enormous if that could be a part of the solution.
It is, but the teams now have got to worry about how do we make money on this too.
Right.
All of a sudden now this money we had earmarked for our league is going to be gone because we don't have the money coming in. They can't make those payments. Bankruptcy ensues. And so now what do you do? How do you get that money? And, those are things that have to be worked out, and it goes way far up the ladder, more so than I can even comment. I just know that in the end, I would believe that it's going to be a streaming service that's available. The question would be how much money. And to your point, that does add up. And everyone, especially now with inflation going the way it is and prices soaring in just about every walk of life that you have to deal with, I don't know how many people are going to be willing to do it. And that would be a shame. So they got to be mindful of both things here. They want to make money, yes, but they got to make that product available. And maybe it's more advertising dollars that they can get, that they didn't maybe have an opportunity to with AT&T Sports Network, for example, here or out in Seattle. I don't know. There's a lot of work yet to be done. I haven't heard any clarity about it at all at this point. So we'll see where it goes.
Before I let you run, I'm going to put you on the spot. Does this team, A, end up in the playoffs, and B, when and if they do, how far do they go?
Yes, they will make the playoffs. I just think games in hand help them. And I can't see them totally falling apart here. I think their inconsistency is a problem. But when they play and when they put their minds to playing the way they're capable of, I think they're a pretty good hockey team. Again, the goaltending, I wish I had a prediction for you with the goaltending. If I knew an answer there, because it's uncertain, that is a problem. And I think it will again lead to their downfall in the first round. I can't look at it any other way at this point. I was hoping Jari would get back and be really good at what he's done because I think when healthy, he is a pretty good goaltender. However, we have not seen that, and we haven't seen it in the postseason. So how do you know for sure? Those other teams have big goaltending advantages, I think, specifically Boston. Linus Ullmark has been great all year, very consistent. That team is, if they end up getting that team, although sports is meant to be played, we could talk about all we want. Just go back to what year was it, Chris? 2012 or 13 when they took on the Bruins, and the Bruins swept them, even though the Penguins had stocked lineup with.
Right.
They just added Iginla and Morrow and the crankshaft and everybody else, and then they got swept in that series. So, it's unbelievable how it works. But generally speaking, they get in, yes, but I don't think they last long at this point.
The irony of Ron Hextall making so many mistakes over the last 2+ years, and yet his downfall coming down to the idea of not being able to get competent goaltending as a former goaltender himself is just too rich. And I think we'll everybody out on the other side of the state, I talked to some people from Philly last week, will be sitting there nodding their heads knowingly saying, "We told you so."
Well, I'll tell you one thing that they look bad. This wasn't him. This was more of a Rutherford, but they traded Philip Gustafson, who they drafted, and he's now looking like a really good young goalie in the future. And that Derek Brassard trade was just one that didn't need to be done, and it was. And that's another thing, the good with Rutherford and the bad with Rutherford all at the same time.
I just talked with Eric Tangradi about the way how good Mike Matheson looked last night. You see
he was
Jared
flying, and he's a plus player on a crappy team.
Exactly. Jared McCann and Brandon Tanev are key to a really good Seattle
How about
team.
Evan Rodriguez?
I mean, we just keep going down the list, and all of
those
the
are
forwards
plays they could have made.
Yeah, all of those forwards.
They went the other direction.
Yes, and all of those forwards are exactly the kind of forwards they're looking for right now. Middle six guys.
Right.
So yeah, we'll see where it goes from here. Pomp, thanks for taking the time today and talking about a multitude of issues, man. I appreciate it.
All right, the Mack attack anytime. Thank you.
Great stuff from Pomp. I really do. I think it's interesting that CBS Pittsburgh, as Pomp works for him, KDKA and or the CW locally would be interested in getting in on some of those games. I think if nothing else, especially in the months of, well, at least in the month of April, right? When the Pirates are just getting started up and the Penguins are playing playoff games that may only be broadcast locally, or that at least have local broadcast rights attached to them. You think of the first 2 rounds of the playoffs, there's going to be schedule conflicts. So what happens if there's nowhere to put one game, let alone 2? Is there an instance where maybe the remnants of AT&T Sportsnet is broadcasting a Penguins playoff game and a Pirates regular season game, maybe even something like the home opener, somehow ends up on KDKA TV2 or the CW? There's a million questions that go into both the immediate impact of these local sports channels going bankrupt in so many places, all the Bally networks, but also the AT&T sports networks, and then the long-term effect of that too, in so much as how do things get ironed out for future seasons, or at the very least this baseball season that's just getting started in a few weeks. It would be something to see Fenway Sports Group kind of swoop in, say, hey, we've got the blueprint laid out. We've got all the people in place up in Boston with Nesson. We know how to handle baseball and hockey. We'll take your people and basically just buy up the network and start broadcasting Pirates and Penguin games. Since we've already got an 80% stake in Nesson, we already own the majority of the Pittsburgh Penguins. It sounds like John Henry, owner of the Red Sox, chairman of Fenway Sports Group, and Bob Nutting have some sort of relationship, the owner of the Pirates. So maybe it's something that works out for everybody involved. The question would be, how much will it work out when your wallet comes to play too? Because if it's a streaming service, if it's an app, add another one onto your Hulu and your Netflix and your Paramount Plus and whatever else you're using, Fubo, all of it. Before you know it, you look up and you're paying as much in cable as you were. You're paying as much in streaming services, I should say, as you were in cable. Fascinating, though, wherever we're headed. We're headed into one more segment here on Fifth Avenue Faceoff with Jackie Redmond of NHL Network, Peacock. She does some work with WWE, is all over the place. But it's Women's History Month, the month of March. So I thought we'd talk to an accomplished female broadcaster, someone who works around the NHL on a daily basis, and talk to her about not just what she does, how she got there, but also, well, about the NHL and the Penguins specifically. Jackie Redmond of NHL Network, next here on Fifth Avenue Faceoff. Welcome back in. It's Fifth Avenue Faceoff. Chris Mack of 93.7 The Fan and The Fan Morning Show. Lucky enough to be joined by Jackie Redmond of NHL Network, Peacock. You do a little bit of everything. Gets feisty on Fridays. This is perfect, Jackie. Been trying to get you on for a while, but I know your schedule is packed. It worked out, though, that it's March, right? And so this is where I want to start with you. I want to talk Pens. I want to talk hockey. But I want to start with Women's History Month, right?
Okay.
And who was, little Jackie growing up in Ontario, right? Watching hockey, big Leafs fan. Who was the woman or women maybe that inspired you or motivated you to do this crazy thing called broadcasting, to chase down a career and then to do it in probably one of the wildest ways people could think of, in like a reality show format and get into it that way? So what inspired you starting when you were a little girl?
You know what? I've been asked this question a lot this month in particular. We had an all women's edition of NHL Now, so we did a bunch of promo for that, and I got asked a lot. And the crazy thing is that, when I look back to my childhood of watching hockey and watching Hockey Night in Canada and hanging out with my dad, like there wasn't a woman in sports, in particular in hockey, that I was like, I want to do what she's doing. Or there just wasn't a lot of women doing anything in hockey. But I loved Cassie Campbell. She was captain of Team Canada. She's a broadcaster now, but when I was like a kid, she was playing, and I had her card and I got it signed at a hockey tournament one weekend. Like I just thought that she was the cat's meow, the coolest thing. Haley Wickenheiser, of course, too. But for whatever reason, I gravitated towards Cassie Campbell. I'm pretty sure she was on a cereal box at some point. But in terms of like women playing hockey, I just thought Cassie Campbell was so cool. But what really, I think, inspired me to do what I do and to chase this crazy career is twofold. In terms of the female aspect, it's my mom. Growing up, my mom was an absolute boss, still is. She works her tail off. She was the breadwinner in my family. She is somebody that is super independent, believes that the sky is the limit. Like, this is the woman that I saw as a young girl, kind of doing her thing, not taking no for an answer, and sort of climbing the corporate ladder in her world. And so for me, I think it was never a question of like if a woman could be whatever she wanted. Like, I just had a mom that just really chased everything she ever wanted in life, and had a husband that supported that. And so I think from a very, deep philosophical standpoint, I think that was just such a great model and image that I had in my life. And I'm very fortunate to have had that. I know that not everyone does. So I think that's the first thing. And then secondly, my dad, who's not a woman, but my dad, was really the person that inspired me to go for it and made me feel like my voice mattered and my opinion mattered. And I don't even know that he did it intentionally. I think my sister and I both were tomboys. We played a ton of sports, including hockey, and we watched a lot of hockey with my dad. And as I got older, I didn't want to go to bed. I wanted to stay up later and talk about the game. And my dad, used to listen to these sports talk radio shows where people would call in, ask questions, and the host would answer them. And, my dad let me start staying up for those. And then he would kind of have the conversation with me, like, I don't know, should Darcy Tucker be on the power play? Like, what do you think? And he would, kind of turned me into his little buddy, because my mom traveled a lot. She was gone a lot through the week as a kid, working. And so I kind of just had that foundation of just like, I got to school and I got to high school and I got older, and I was very open with my opinion. I wasn't afraid to share it. And I think it's just because my dad, in this roundabout way, kind of taught me through his actions and the way he treated me that, I did have a space in the conversation, and my opinion was valid. And, if I wanted to argue about who should be playing with Matt Sundin and whether or not that should be Darcy Tucker, like, I was going to tell my classmates what I thought. So I think that it all stems from that. And as I got older, hopefully this is changing now, but when I was in high school and even college, I always would get in these debates, conversations, whatever, about the Leafs, the Blue Jays, whatever. And guys were always very surprised. Like, how do you know so much about this? Why? Wow, you're like really opinionated. And I think I started to realize over time that, like, hey, maybe that is something that's unique about me. I hope that's not unique about me anymore. And I hope that all the girls, in North America and around the world that are showing up to school, giving their thoughts on the way the Penguins approach the deadline, I would hope that they're not getting, responded to with shocked faces. And like, how do you know so much? It's like, well, how do you know so much? The same way. We love the game. So I know that was a very long answer, but it's the truth.
It's great to hear. As the dad of a soon-to-be 14-year-old daughter and a soon-to-be 10-year-old son, there were plenty of heated debates this past fall about whether the Steelers should continue to lose so they could get a higher draft pick or whatever. Or
the old tank debate.
Exactly. So it's great to know that that you had your parents right there at arm's length as your role model in that regard. But here's a question I have to ask. And I know you've been asked about this before. You grow up in like London, right? Toronto area? Like
a couple hours west of Toronto.
Okay. So other than the O on Toronto there, that's the first time in all the times I've watched you on the fly or NHL Now or anything where I've heard, sorry, that Canadian accent come through, right? So do you get chirped by family now when you go back home that you sound like some crazy American?
Dude, I get chirped on both sides of the border. Like, I walk around NHL and MLB Network, and there's a producer here who is now a dear friend of mine, who for the longest time would not address me as Jackie. He would just be like, sorry, what's up, sorry? And I was like, Colin, stop it, like, cut it out. So here at the network, I get teased for sounding Canadian. I used to do Quick Pitch a lot, the baseball highlight show. And I would get tweets and different coworkers pointing out how I said out. It's like, oh, this is going to be so fun to do because you're going to have to say out like a million times in the show, because we used to voice the actual highlight packs when I did it. Right. And so I get teased there. But when I go home, they're like, you sound like an American. Why are you over like pronouncing your O's? Why are you saying out? Like, why are you being like, you sound different? So yeah, I don't win on either side.
Well, this works out because speaking of funny voices, you know a Pittsburgher from some of the work you do at Peacock, and he doesn't quite have the Pittsburgh accent, the Yinzer accent, but Corey Graves has to have taught you some level of appreciation for the Yinzer accent. And, you know, we talk a little bit like this sometimes if we spend too much time down Pompeani's eating a sandwich with the French fries on it. You know what I'm saying, Jack?
Yes, no, he doesn't have that accent, does he? Like
No.
he's WWE has trained him well to sound like a generic. No, just kidding. Corey Graves is the absolute best and a huge Penguins fan, which I didn't know until I worked with him. We did a holiday show together, and we talked so much Pittsburgh Penguins hockey. So I actually haven't seen him in a few weeks. So I wonder, or talked to him, I wonder how he feels about the Penguins right now. But yeah, he's the best, the ultimate pro, and one of a few people that's been super gracious and welcoming for me at WWE. So and it's good to know, like, when you start something new, you're just like, am I gonna find hockey people here? Like, who are my hockey people gonna be? And so it turns out, I had no idea, but turns out he's one. Edge, of course, is one. There's lots of hockey fans over at WWE.
Well, tell Corey everybody in Pittsburgh said hello. You guys got a chance to play a charity softball game with him the summer before last, and just a great dude. Let's talk about the Penguins now for just a couple minutes. And it's up and down. It's a roller coaster here in Pittsburgh. They win a huge game over the weekend against the Rangers, for example, who they're chasing down in the standings. But then all of a sudden they go out and lay a total egg against the Canadiens, a team who has nothing left to play for. People have their worries about Jari. He hasn't played well since he came back from his injury. People are getting, not that Jeff Carter isn't a great guy and he hasn't had an awesome career, but he's just not getting it done out there anymore. People want to see him up in the press box rather than down on the ice. There's this back and forth of one day they look like a team who's got one more good run left in them. The next day they look like a team who'll be lucky to make the playoffs. So what's the view from your perspective on where the Penguins are at right now?
Well, I think you just nailed the main thing we've talked about on our show all year. Is just a lack of consistency. Like, who are the Pittsburgh Penguins? Is it the team that lost 7 in a row earlier in the year? Or are they the team that, you know, over the last couple of weeks has actually played pretty well? I think Crosby and Malkin and Zucker, like, they've kind of been like dragging this team to the postseason. And I understand, like, for me, it's just the lack of consistency. And I think when they came into this season, you know, bringing everyone back, it was this exciting thing where it's like, oh, I wasn't sure they could bring everybody back. They do bring all their core pieces back. They got to go for it. Like, this is not a team that's getting any younger in terms of their core. Then the deadline happens, and, you know, the front office took a bit of a beating with the deadline approach. But I was looking at the stats this morning, like, since, I don't know, like February 21st, 22nd, something like that, Pittsburgh's got like a top 5 or 6 record in the NHL. So that's great. And like, you look at who has the most points for them over that span. It's Crosby, it's Malkin, it's the players that you would expect. But I think the big concern for me is the goaltending. And I hate saying that because I don't want to like knock on Tristan Jarry. He hasn't been good. I think it's like an 863 save since he came back from injury. Not ideal. And then you look at the last couple of years, they've dealt with goaltending problems in the postseason because of injuries, because of guys not playing well. And now it feels like they're going to go into the postseason. I do think they're going to make it, but they're going into a postseason with the same type of question mark. Like, okay, so Tristan Jarry isn't exactly playing at a top level. And what happens if Tristan Jarry gets hurt again? Like, hip injuries are no joke. So, yeah, that would be my big concern for Pittsburgh. But I'm like a hopeless, I don't know what the sports version of this is, but I'm like a hopeless romantic. And so for me as a Nova Scotia girl, I'm just like, I need to see Sidney Crosby go on a run. And, you know, the thing that gives me hope is that those core guys are doing everything in their power to find a way to bring this team into the postseason. And then hopefully anything can happen then. But I mean, we saw Crosby last year against the Rangers. He almost single-handedly took them out. Like, that was wild.
Right. Yeah, I'm like you. I'm a hopeless nostalgic, I guess, is the way I look at it. It's
Sure.
like, it's why I was excited to bring Crosby and Malkin and Letang all back for another couple runs maybe at this thing. And then, like, to your point, they've ended up being the reason this team is getting dragged along as they are, hopefully towards the 17th consecutive playoff appearance.
Mm-hmm.
So before I let you run, I got to ask you, I'll bring it all the way back around to where we started.
Okay.
Women's History Month, you told the story of being able to look up to your mother is like a boss power mom, right? Having your dad there to have the sports conversations with. So what advice do you have maybe for a young girl? When I go upstairs and I meet my daughter walking in the front door from off the school bus this morning and tell her I got a chance to talk to you, what's your advice to girls that are looking to follow the same path you've gone down?
This is going to sound textbook and cliche, but I genuinely, truly believe it. Trust yourself, trust your instincts, and know that like you are capable of the things that you dream about. And I think, for me, and this is going to be another long answer, so I'm very sorry.
No.
But for me, I truly believe that my career started to change and really take off the day that I decided that like I was going to stay true to who I am and I was going to do it my way, regardless of what anyone was saying. And I've told this story a lot recently, but when I was working in Toronto, I was covering all sports. I was doing 6 different shows. I was kind of like a utility player. I was all over the place. I was doing highlights, but like the dream was always hockey. And when Sportsnet got the rights, I was like, all right, I have to get in. Like I got to be a part of this. And I wasn't. And at one point, an executive said, Jackie, you're great, but like you don't stay in the box. And I spent days like just obsessing over that comment. Like, okay, so I am good and you think I'm talented, but like I don't stay in this box that you speak of. Like I'm not conservative enough. I laugh on the air. I make light of things. I say what I think. And I genuinely contemplated like, what, maybe I'm going about this wrong. Maybe I do need to be more traditional and I need to just stick to being newsy and being direct and like reading what's in the prompter or saying just being very basic and like doing that. And I remember talking, to people that I trust, my parents specifically, my sister, and telling them like, I think I just got to be more serious. Like I just got to be, and they're like, what do you mean serious? You take everything seriously. Just because you have fun doesn't mean that you don't take the sport seriously.
Right.
And, my dad said, you have 2 choices. You can fit in the box and stay in the box, I should say. And maybe you'll have all the success in the world, but are you going to be happy? Like, are you going to genuinely be happy with what you're doing? And I think that question like rattled me to my core a little bit. And I was like, wait, what does this mean? Now I'm questioning all of life. But in that moment, and ultimately I decided like I would rather fail being who I am and wearing my heart on my sleeve than succeed and then have to perform my whole life. And so for me, I just think it all changed when I just decided like, this is who I am. I know what I'm doing. I know I have a lot to learn, but I am going to approach this as the individual that I am. And I think now more than ever, I mean, I started 10 years ago. Now more than ever, I think we are accepting of sports personalities, people being more open about who they are, who they grew up rooting for, whatever it is. Not everyone has to be like me. If you are super serious and you want to break stories, like chase that, but just don't let someone tell you what you are capable of or not. Like nobody defines you, you define you. So like, what does that mean to you? And chase that because it'll come from a genuine place. And I think when that happens, you work harder than ever because you're just coming from a real place as opposed to like, I'm trying to be like Joe broadcaster and I have to speak this way and like do it this way. You don't. So that was very long. I am giving you like novel answers right now.
Look, I appreciate the fact that before you gave that long answer, you threw in another story. So it was perfect. It was you being you, exactly like you're talking about. So great stuff, Jackie. Seriously, thank you so much for the time today. It's from the Women's History Month aspect of it to the growing up a hardcore hockey fan in Ontario aspect of it, the little bit of Halifax, Nova Scotia you got in there too. I think like everyone else here in the Burgh, we'd love to see at least one more run for Sid. Heck, maybe you could go up against McKinnon in the Cup final. That would be perfect for you, right?
Wouldn't that be that'd be so much fun. And I have to say, like, I get tweets sometimes, oh, you hate the Pittsburgh Penguins, you never talk about them. Listen, I genuinely want, like, even though Crosby is my main rooting interest, like, it's a genuine interest. Like, I am rooting for the Penguins, and I hope they get in.
Well, we appreciate the time today. It was great to catch up with you. Best of luck with everything.
Hey, awesome time. Thanks for having me, Chris.
Just perfect timing for having Jackie on. As I mentioned a couple times, it's Women's History Month, and she's done it. I would call it the hard way, right? Like winning a reality show in Canada. It was called Drafted, the search for Canada's next sportscaster, working her way up through Sportsnet, and then getting to cover the sport she grew up watching with her parents, right? Especially with her dad. Like she talked about watching the Leafs and getting to talk about hockey now every single night. Great stuff from Jackie. Of course, can watch her on NHL Network, also on the NHL on TNT. And as we mentioned there, with our guy Corey Graves from Pittsburgh on Peacock in some WWE coverage as well. All right. Rangers week continues. How will things go down Thursday? Will it be Casey DeSmith in net or Tristan Jarry getting another shot? Will Jeff Carter still be in the lineup? Who's going to be on the blue line with all these injuries? We'll break it all down on Friday. Be sure to hit the follow button inside your Odyssey app, AUDACY. Go get the app and then follow Fifth Avenue Faceoff for all the latest episodes as soon as they're ready. Wherever you get your podcasts, follow the podcast. Be sure to subscribe, download, listen, rate, review. We love positive ratings and reviews via whichever podcast catcher you're using to get it. And be sure to come back here later in the week as we continue to break down Pens Rangers week and look ahead to the last 15 games or so of this regular season and hopefully a playoff run with the Pens here on Fifth Avenue Faceoff.